You hear the music, so you know what time it is. The Hang Time Podcast. Sekou Smith here at our headquarters in Atlanta. My main man, John Schumann, up in Jersey. Shu, glad to have you back in a safe, quiet place. And we're joined this week on the show by one of our oldest and most trusted compatriots, a guy that we feel good traveling on the other side of the world with. USA Today Sports' Sam Amick. You know his work. Been on a West Coast ride for years covering the league. Sam, how you doing, my friend?
Morning, gentlemen. Right out the gate, Sekou, it is morning, yeah, 100%. You know, you got to call me oldest. You know, I'm on the backside of 40, and it's already hurting. You know, but
we're all there. We're all there. The aches and pains, Sam. The aches and pains are real. You roll out of the bed slowly and put one foot on the ground at a time and hope nothing pops.
Nah, we're good.
Sam, before we dive into our Western Conference summer rankings, the NBA schedule has been released. At least the key dates so far for the 2018-19 season have been announced. Opening night, Sixers and Celtics kick it off. Thunder, Warriors on TNT in a monster doubleheader. Christmas Day games, which are always important for people. The Bucks versus the Knicks kick it off at noon. Thunder, Rockets, Sixers, Celtics, Lakers, Warriors. Finishing it off with the Blazers and the Jazz, and the Martin Luther King Day games, which always highlight the schedule. Pelicans, Grizzlies, Rockets, Sixers, Warriors, Lakers. Now, this is for both you guys. Does it surprise you how it's been structured, or are you stunned at all at some of the teams you see or don't see listed on those marquee days?
Yeah, I mean, I was a little bit. We kind of talked off air about it a little bit. It's not the kind of thing that I typically am going to get real worked up about. I don't argue, though, with two basic ideas, maybe three that come to mind. For one, you know, the absence of the Spurs. We know they're small market, but, you know, that is a rarity. I saw on Twitter yesterday that Jeff McDonald, longtime beat writer for the San Antonio Express News, given context and just saying, yeah, this is definitely new. And now it's the post-Kawhi Leonard Spurs with DeMar trying to get comfortable, and they couldn't find themselves out of the schedule anywhere. I was kind of disappointed that there's not really a marquee Warriors-Rockets matchup. I mean, that was an incredible conference finals, and, you know, I don't understand why they wouldn't find a home for that. And then, you know, the one that our buddy and colleague Tim Bontemps had written about a little bit at the Washington Post is the Knicks. I don't argue with the idea of the Knicks still getting that prime real estate on the schedule, despite the fact that their team is not yet relevant. You know, it's a market thing. We all know why, but it's a little bit disappointing.
I think it's also an arena thing. You know, let's have a Christmas game at Madison Square Garden, you know, and bring a star.
Sure.
Into Madison Square Garden for Christmas. You know, I think if you're going to have 5 games, you know, I think there's an opportunity for, hey, let's be in New York on Christmas and let's put one of our top stars there. And Giannis Antetokounmpo certainly qualifies in that regard.
Yeah, I don't know where this notion that, you know, you have to have some Christmas Day game or opening night game to validate your stardom. I mean, there's 30 teams. Not everybody has a comparable star, you know, in terms of who commands the spotlight. I understand the Raptors have never moved the needle from a rating standpoint. The Spurs, for as great as they've been, have never really been a ratings monster.
Right.
I understand the difficulty for the schedule maker, and I'm defending the schedule maker here, which is usually not my bag to defend anybody, but I understand it's a difficult thing, and you got to pick the stars you think that will resonate. I think Sixers Celtics on opening night is a no-brainer. And the drama between Thunder and Warriors is always going to be, as long as Russ is breathing and Kevin Durant's breathing, that's always going to be something that people pay attention to. The Christmas Day lineup, there are a lot of teams having worked on Christmas for the last however many years. I'd be glad to see my team not playing on Christmas. That means you get a little bit of break. You can just sit at home and watch and relax and enjoy it.
I'll say this too real quick, Sekou, is to piggyback off that. And I wish I had the numbers in front of me. One of my other thoughts as far as you talk about just working on Christmas Day, and I think we probably all agree that, you know, the fans look at these guys and they say, all right, they make so much money, I don't want to hear any complaining. But as long as I've covered the league, like, they're human beings, you know what I mean? They have families.
Yeah.
So you can't take away those sensibilities just because of what their paycheck says. And LeBron, I guarantee you when he saw this schedule, he just shook his head and he said, all right, here we go again. I mean, LeBron has become the guy who they not only are obviously going to have on Christmas Day, but more often than not, they've got him away from home. And so, you know, yet again, and I'm sure he could have seen that coming, but last year, I remember talking with him briefly about this and a couple other reporters where he just shook his head. He's like, you know, I know how the machine works, and he's the big ticket item, and he'll be away from home again.
Exactly. Anyway, people can kind of wring their hands over that all they want. The full schedule will be released on the afternoon of August 10th. You get the entire thing. So check NBA.com for all of that. And I'm sure people will spend their time plotting their season. I like it because we get to plot our entire work season. And speaking of work, guys, the Western Conference, Sam, last week we talked with Michael Lee of Yahoo Sports running down the East, which I think is going to be much more intriguing than people think. But the West, there's no shortage of storylines going around the Western Conference. And Shu, you got your Western Conference off-season rankings came out on Monday. Check those out on NBA.com as well. And we'll use that as kind of a jumping-off point for our discussion. I know the Rockets had the best record in the league during the regular season last year, but Shu, you've got the Warriors at number one for obvious reasons. Regardless of the records, they go into this as the top dog, and I would imagine that's on everybody's list.
Yeah, obviously I think you can ask the question, Warriors or the field right now as far as the 2019 championship. There's other seasons where you don't start to ask that question until we get late in the season. But right now, I think I would take the Warriors over the field right now for the 2019 championship. That's where it starts. And, we'll see a couple months in how much the regular season matters to them. I think the addition of DeMarcus Cousins adds a little bit of intrigue to the regular season, but we don't know when he's going to come back. We saw it last year where it became, where the grind really started to wear on them. And you can even say boredom was a factor. It's certainly possible another team will have a better regular season record. I don't think the Rockets will be as good, but, they could still certainly, there were 7 games better in the regular season last year, but I don't think that really matters with Golden State.
Yeah. Sam, you see them as much or more than anyone. Does the boredom factor get eliminated for the Warriors this season after what they dealt with last year and kind of the adversity they went through and the injection of Boogie Cousins maybe into the mix?
Yeah, I think so. I've kind of enjoyed kind of watching the psychological aspect of this Warriors team year in and year out. Like for me, it's the closest that I've seen to, I did not cover the old Bulls teams that had, separate three-peats and kind of the stuff that Steve Kerr has talked about, where the kind of psychological component, the mental will that it takes to stay sharp, stay focused. For me, this is that. And they've gone from being the best thing since sliced bread, 67 wins, then pushing ahead to 73, then getting Durant. And I think what they go into this year learning the hard way and probably having learned from and going to evolve from is just that it is one thing to mentally tell yourself that we're going to dial it back and prioritize the playoffs and kind of take that calculated, pragmatic approach like they did last regular season, to kind of realize that the emotional component is not nearly that simple, if that makes any sense. What happens is you lose more games than you're used to losing, and then you find out that when your head hits the pillow that night, you're not happy. And over time, over the course of all these months where these, again, the human factor, where these guys are breathing the same oxygen and sharing a room that is so intimate like a locker room, what happens is you have a little bit of a pent-up frustration that I think they underestimated last year. And it didn't end up boiling over to the point of the mission not getting accomplished. They got another champions for the third time in 4 years, but I do think it's going to be a different vibe going into this year. I think it would have been anyways, but then you add in the DeMarcus thing, which I think it's kind of like just a welcome distraction in terms of something new to figure out, something new to even in the locker room to figure out. He's probably not going to play until December, January, wherever it might be, but it's going to feel a little more fresh. I don't know if they're going to win 70 games, but I don't think they're going to take nearly as many nights off as they did last year.
Yeah, I think it's going to be something very unique. The last time we saw a true dynasty, and I don't want to take away from what the Heat did when they had LeBron and D Wade and Chris Bosh, but this Warriors run feels more dynastic, if that makes sense to me, because I don't see the cliff coming. I don't see an end. With the Heat team, we knew they were done. I mean, the Spurs cooked them in that last finals. They went head to head in those back-to-back years, and it kind of felt done. Like they were going to have to come back with something completely new in Miami, even if LeBron stuck around. This Warriors team, it's fascinating to me to see how you figure out a way to keep this thing going when there is no reasonable end in sight. Like they're all their guys, the core guys are in the primes of their careers. Steph just got his big deal. I know Draymond and Clay will be coming up in terms of free agency the next few years. KD is basically a free agent every summer, but it just doesn't feel like there has to be any end to this group anytime soon, which makes it a totally different monster than what we've dealt with. I think back to the Shaq Kobe Lakers before that train went off the tracks. That's the feeling I have with them. I'm thinking they're going to be able to compete for championships as long as they stay together and stay, on the same vibe. To me, the Warriors have a better outlook long-term than even that pairing did because of the relationships that Steph, Draymond, Clay, KD, Andre Iguodala, that their core group of guys have. Did anybody in the West do enough to rattle the Warriors, Sam? Do you think somebody did something that made the Warriors perk up and say, oh, man, we got to be on alert for this team? Or are they still in that same mode where they're looking within first and foremost in terms of how they get themselves motivated for another season?
I mean, I think they're mostly looking within. I'm going to cheat, and, I pulled up John's rankings just to dig in a little bit while we're sitting here talking. And, I mean, my thought would be this. The Rockets, I think we all agree, it's either a mild step backwards or a significant step backwards, and then you got differing opinions on how Melo is going to fit into that group. The two teams that come to mind, if you're the Warriors for me, OKC at minimum guaranteed that they're still there just by getting Paul George to re-up. And they're going to have to figure out how good they're going to be, but it's not going to be what we thought it might be, which could have been Russell Westbrook on an island by himself,
right?
With Paul heading to Lakers land somewhere else. So OKC is still there, and I'm a pretty big proponent of just the chemistry idea, year two with these guys together. Paul, I think, signing long-term really helps in terms of just sending that message to the rest of the guys on the team that we're trying to build something here. They got Andre Robertson back, and that is a major factor. You can't forget, I know it's only one regular season game, but there was that one game last year where the Thunder just boat raced the Warriors, and you have seen little sample sizes like that where you say, all right, maybe the matchup could be tricky for Golden State. So I think OKC is there and is going to be better. I think Utah had a relatively quiet summer from the standpoint of, they held on to their guys, and I think they were smart to do so. But we are, I think, nationally already overlooking them again.
Yeah,
I think they're going to be legit. I mean, they've got a fantastic foundation. They got the coaching. They got the good front office. They got the dynamic star and Donovan and Rudy doing his thing. So those are the more legitimate teams for me and Houston's not going away. I mean, Chris Paul can stay healthy, which is a major, major factor. Then they're right there too. Once you get past that group, and with maybe the Spurs being an X factor, let's see how DeMar fits in. I don't think the Warriors are all that worried about anybody in the West.
John, I'm just going to tell you straight up, your Eastern Conference rankings.
The West was harder. I'll tell you that. I mean, especially when you get to 5 through 10. I think I'm happy with 1 through 4. I think Houston, I'm good with at number 2, even though they lost to Ariza.
Right.
They were so close. I mean, I wrote it this week, is that in these 4 years that the Warriors sort of dynasty, the biggest what if is probably the Draymond Green suspension, right? Like, what if he doesn't get suspended? Mm-hmm. Not only because it affects that series, but also maybe affects Kevin Durant's free agency a couple weeks later.
Sure.
But Chris Paul's injury is huge. I mean, that's a huge what if that we're going to, look back and realize how close this team was. And they had big leads. Even with Paul injured, they had big leads in games 6 and 7 early in those games, but they still led by 15 in both of those games. And then Utah, I think, is really, really good. They had the 3rd best point differential in the West last year. They brought everybody back except for Jonas Jerebko. Their best offensive player should be better, right? I mean, he was a rookie last year, and I think the summer after rookie year is a player's most important summer. Yeah. His biggest chance to make a big leap, and I think Donovan Mitchell is going to be even better this year. And we forget that Rudy Gobert also missed a bunch of games last year too. So this team can be really good. I just had to go back and remind myself they beat Golden State 3 out of 4 in the regular season last year. I don't think the Warriors are thinking about the Jazz much when they go to bed at night, but I think it's a team that we definitely could be the second best team in the West. I think this is a really, really good team. They have
second best,
a star on offense, a guy who's a threat on offense. It's going to make defenses. It's going to scare defense. Mitchell has to get better with his sort of pull-up shooting. If he does that, that opens up things for everybody else. Defensively, they were miles ahead of every other team in the league once Gobert came back last year. So just because they don't have the stars that other teams have, I think they can be really, really good. I mean, they're still a huge step below, but I put them ahead of Oklahoma City right now.
You put them ahead of several teams. I mean, I'm surprised you had the Lakers and Spurs as low as you did.
The Lakers are impossible to figure out, and we'll talk about them in a little bit. I know, but what else? Like they're building around him in such a different way than the Heat and the Cavs did over the last 7 or 8 years. The vets that they brought in, that the Lakers brought in, do not fit with LeBron, at least offensively. They can't shoot. The talent that they already had is all young, and unproven. And the Lakers could finish out of the playoffs. I think it's a possibility. They could finish as high as 4th or 5th. They can finish as low as 10th. Because I don't know what they are. That's why I said the West was tougher to figure out. Not only because of the Lakers, but because of, what a couple of these other teams have done. Portland with, so.
All right, well, look, I'll put it to you this way. Sam, I don't trust the Thunder. I couldn't buy stock in the Jazz being an ascending team. I don't trust, though, the Thunder, the Timberwolves, the Nuggets couldn't even get into the playoffs last year. I don't trust these teams to jump past the Spurs or the Pelicans necessarily in the rankings. Are you convinced Oklahoma City's ready for this ascension? Just because they kept Paul George?
I mean, I'm convinced that it can't be worse, and barring injury, they're going to have an uptick. The Robertson factor is real. If we did a power rankings of most impactful, least known players in the league, he would be on the short list.
Right.
Last year, Paul George was a short list guy for Defensive Player of the Year, and all of a sudden Robertson disappeared, and everything changed about the OKC defense. And it's not a sexy storyline, but that is what happened to them in the second half of the year. They stopped defending, and they couldn't stop teams, and they were in trouble. I'm buying OKC to a degree. It's just a question of where the ceiling is. We have so many unknowns. I think what John's hitting on is that LeBron is certainly LeBron. I'm not going to handicap him falling out of the playoff picture, but I have no clue what to think of that group and what they're going to become. I don't have much clue what to think about the Spurs. I mean, you have so many layers to that situation out there. You still got veterans, in town with Powell trying to be part of it, Rudy Gay re-upping, and no Tony Parker, DeJounte Murray having to take the mantle. And DeMar is, I think, a tremendous player, but we've seen him in a Raptors uniform in that system and that environment with Kyle Lowry by his side for a long time. I think it's going to take him some time to figure out who he is in San Antonio. So there's a ton that's uncertain. The Utah thing, again, I keep cheating on you guys here because I am buying big on the Jazz like John. And, the idea that they could be second in the West, and just to throw this is straight off your guys' website, NBA.com/stats. I mean, 29-6 from late January down the stretch, and more importantly, that net rating. So that's the best, right there with the best record in the NBA. But that net rating was plus 12 with the second best team of plus 9.6. I mean, they dominated for a long time in that second half of last year. But, we shall see.
Don't get me wrong. I liked what I saw from the Jazz down the stretch. I covered that Jazz-Rockets series. They had the Rockets nervous. Right. They really did. But, man, we all know that this league, at the end of the day, hinges on star players. I mean, and the Jazz have a true future star in Donovan Mitchell. But, I don't know if I'm ready for Joe Ingles or Rudy Gobert to qualify as that kind of a game-changing number two to Donovan Mitchell that they leapfrog some of the other teams. I guess the potential, of course, is there. I'm not certain that it becomes what we think it could. We've talked Jazz. We've talked a little bit about the Thunder. John, you got the Timberwolves at 5.
This is where it starts to get sketchy.
The way they flamed out. The way they flamed out in the playoffs last year in the first round, and the craziness we've seen in the offseason, the rumblings about whatever the chemistry issues might be, with Jimmy Butler and Karl Anthony Towns, Andrew Wiggins. We don't know where his mind is, coming back, whether or not he's ready to take another step in his development. Is that ambitious for Tibbs? You think that's on the ambitious side for him and his team to be considered a top 5 team in the West?
I'd have to go back and double check, but I think they were a top 5 team before Jimmy Butler got hurt last year. Mm-hmm. And I think that's sort of factoring in. That's a factor in my thinking. Mm-hmm. I also like Anthony Tolliver. I think he's an upgrade off the bench. And you got to remember, Karl Anthony Towns is 22 years old. He's going to get better. Andrew Wiggins is 23. I think he's going to get better. I'm not as confident in his ascension, but Towns, You know, if it starts to click, especially on defense with him, that could make a big difference. And like I said, they were pretty sure top 4 or 5 team in the West before Butler got hurt. And that obviously they sunk at that point and then held on for that 8 spot. So that was the big thing in my thinking. But yeah, I think this is a fragile team, definitely, as far as, you know, Butler's ability to leave next year, sort of the chemistry, the fact that they somehow had a top 5 offense without shooting many threes. Like they still don't have shooting around them. That's not a weakness that they really addressed. I mean, Tolliver, I will say, is a little bit more aggressive a shooter than Bjelica was. So I think that's an upgrade a little bit, but that doesn't really move the bottom line too much as far as their offense. So I'll be curious to see, one, if they can repeat their offensive success given their lack of shooting, and 2, if they could, you know, finally take a step forward defensively under Tibbs.
Sam, that you look at core groups around the league and you say, well, this, you know, Philly's got this young core. Boston has this core group of guys. You know, all the true powerhouse teams have a 3 to 4 man core group of players that you look at and say, all right, they got chemistry. They got an understanding of where they fit, you know, on that team. This is the one team that should be in that mix where I question their core group and how connected they are and how long they stick together. Do they make you nervous at all in terms of Butler and Towns and Wiggins and whether or not those 3 guys can comprise the nucleus of that group in Minnesota?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Sekou, you use the word fragile. I think that describes their locker room landscape. I don't trust the group, and mainly because it's not a great look and a great sign when what you constantly hear out of Minnesota is this real sense that, you know, if you had the core guys take a healthy dose of truth serum and asked them about playing in Minnesota, playing in this context with these guys, they'd probably say, no, get me over here, get me over there. You know, Jimmy is coming up on free agency next summer, and already those rumors predictably are starting. I'm going to steal a phrase from Draymond Green with his infamous dust-up with Tristan Thompson when after the playoffs when he said that they're not cut from the same cloth.
Right.
I mean, that is my sense of this situation. I don't think that Jimmy thinks that Carl and Andrew are cut from the same cloth. And, you know, that outlook is probably reciprocated in some fashion. So yeah, I just don't think it's, you know, you would think that Jimmy would be able to come in and infuse these guys with, you know, the kind of the lessons on work habit, the lessons on dedication, and take them up to the next level. It doesn't seem to have happened just yet. Maybe it does take off in a positive way this year. Maybe they find a way to mend some fences. But I think a lot of the noise that you've heard out of Minnesota, when you talk to people close to it, nobody sits there and complains that it's all, you know, fabricated or off base. I mean, I think it's pretty real. And I think you've got this interesting dynamic where when the coach is so tight, you know, with the star player like Tibbs is with Jimmy, that's another layer to this whole thing that makes it tricky. And so you're right. On paper, I love their core. I don't have any faith in that core taking a step forward, going forward, and it feels like they're flirting with having this thing get derailed a little bit.
I like Denver. On that, in that same vein, I really like Denver's core. I think that's a team, and sure, you got them at 6, which I think it's a good spot. I think it's actually where I would project them based on what I saw from them last season and what they've done in the offseason. I think getting Isaiah Thomas for them and pairing him back up with Mike Malone is fantastic. I think that he'll be a guy who's kind of a game changer for them off that bench. Will Barton gets a big deal and moves up. Jokic, gets a big deal and becomes, their entrenched big man star. Gary Harris is an ascending player. I mean, they got so many young guys, Jamal Murray, that I like. They have a bit of a log jam in the front court, obviously. But the one thing about them is, man, are they going to learn how to play some defense long enough to give them a chance to, to reach their potential? And I don't know. It's not like they've added that defensive-minded guy that's going to change it. So it's got to be an organic thing almost. It has to happen from within.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be terrific offensively. They ranked 6th offensively last year with Millsap missing 44 games and with, Jamal Murray in his second year, only 21 years old. So they should only get better. But, with all those contracts you talked about, the pressure is up. The pressure is on now. Jokic got a huge deal. Barton got a $12 million a year deal, and Gary Harris's extension kicks in now. So now they're paying everybody, and And so the pressure is to end this, playoff drought that they've had. Like you said, it's got to start on the defensive end of the floor. I think a healthier Millsap will help. Obviously they were better defensively with him. He comes from, before he came to Denver, he was part of a top 5 defense in Atlanta. And so he's a huge part. But Jokic has got to take a step forward on that end of the floor, and the backcourt's got to be better on that end of the floor. I mean, it's not as Sam would say, a sexy storyline that they have to be better defensively, but that's the bottom line. And obviously Isaiah Thomas doesn't really help on that end of the floor either. So that's the big question for me, and they can't count on having a healthier Millsap to be the answer on defense. They have to just be better collectively.
Yeah. The team that strikes me as kind of the biggest head scratcher, and this is before we get to the Lakers or the Spurs, is the Pelicans. I really thought they hit something. You watch them in the playoffs and you see the way Rondo and Drew Holiday meshed and really found kind of a sweet spot, just work in Portland, when they swept the Blazers out of the playoffs. And then this summer, they didn't knock it out like I thought they would in free agency and keeping their guys. And I was expecting them to come to Boogie with something that would keep him there. That didn't happen. Rondo leaves for the Lakers. I do like Julius Randle as an addition. I really do. But I wasn't blown away with their summer. And I think keeping Alvin was huge. Keeping Alvin Gentry, there is big for them. Did the Pelicans summer not shape up the way you thought, Sam? Did you think they could make a bigger splash with some of these free agents?
I mean, their summer was messy, and I'd actually be curious to get your guys' feedback on. Like, for me, we did our own off-season breakdown and gave these teams grades, and this was one where I was kind of trying to look in the mirror a little bit and answer that question of, was I too easy on them? Because on paper, it looks pretty bad. When you lose, a franchise-altering big man like DeMarcus Cousins, and then you lose your starting point guard who has all these intangibles that everybody talks about, that's about as bad as it gets. I think for me, it's the idea, like I'm always real big on being able to explain choices, not necessarily excuse them, but understand them and why teams did them. And that's my thing with the Pelicans is I can go line by line and feel reasonably okay about the thought process behind what they did. Now, in totality, then you take a step back and you look at it and you're like, oh boy, but there was like 3 or 4 that went against you, even though I understand them. And so that makes it tough. The DeMarcus thing, it was real tricky. Now, I don't know, they might have mishandled it from a negotiation standpoint. And my understanding is there was certainly a number put in front of him early in the process in which he knew that if he wanted to return, this is a kind of, significant cash for a couple of years that would be available to him. They then, his camp then sent the message that they wanted to essentially take that number to market. And that was when the choice was made that, well, this is kind of a take it or leave it type deal. Because if you're going to market, then that comes off the table. And I think if they're being honest, they feel like, this is the best outcome for them because they had such concern about his Achilles. They just didn't want to dedicate time lengthwise on a contract or a ton of money because they're not sure what he's going to be. And I don't blame them. There's not any evidence to say that he's worth, a long-term max deal after that injury. So that I get. And the Rondo thing, you might have differing opinions on, but I know they looked at the age in a serious way. They understood and appreciated everything he brings to the table and who he is, intellectually on the floor, things like that, and then the way he makes other guys better. But they also just said, how long is he going to do this? Not only that, if you go back and let's not forget what Rondo looked like in the regular season. He really had an uptick in the playoffs. But, they can't afford to have anybody ignore the regular season, and he didn't have a great regular season. I like Randall a lot. I think that's one of the better under-the-radar pickups of the summer, so that helps them recover a little bit. I mean, I gave him a C+. I think a lot of folks would have given him worse, but it was a tricky summer for New Orleans.
Yeah. And I don't want to go overboard here in my examination of the Pelicans, but does it say something about Anthony Davis that maybe he needs to be a bit more vocal about wanting to play with or wanting the Pelicans to be able to attract that other star? And I think everybody knows I'm super high on Drew Holiday, have been since he was in Philly when he made an all-star team. I think he's more than capable of being your second or third guy, but I feel like we haven't heard Anthony Davis put the pressure on about, hey, I need some more. I need somebody else, another. And he got that in Boogie. Boogie's gone now. but we haven't heard
Right.
him be vocal about the fact that you're not winning at a high level in this league right now with just one or two stars unless it's LeBron James. Like everybody else that's competing at the highest level has a bunch of stars, or at least 2 to 4 quality high-level players that put you in that position. And I don't feel like Anthony Davis has kind of beat the drum for that. And maybe he shouldn't. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he shouldn't be the one that has to go out and do it. Maybe the Pelicans should recognize it and do it anyway. But to me, that seems like it's missing from the equation in New Orleans right now, Shu.
I mean, I'm not going to blame a guy for not publicly trashing his team. Not trashing is too strong of a word.
I'm not saying
but
trash.
but
I'm just
publicly pressuring his team to do more on the personnel front. That doesn't always work out.
Mm-hmm.
And, who knows what he's doing behind closed doors.
Right.
And yes, you're right. Like, it's on the team to do what they need to do. And they've hamstrung themselves with salaries really up until this point. Next year they'll have a little bit of flexibility with a bunch of these guys coming off the books. But, like I said, I think they've just been sort of hamstrung in salary-wise. I mean, they had to re-sign Jrue Holiday, and if they didn't exactly have space to now go sign somebody else. So I think that's been the issue is more about their books than any lack of desire to improve the team.
That makes sense. I should probably calm down, criticize. Dell Demps.
No, I mean, I think it's just a personality thing, guys. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, you look at, like, Damian Lillard. Damian, from day one, has been the kind of guy where he's like, I'm going to push it. I'm going to say a few things publicly. I don't blame him at all, but seems to, he wants to make sure that ownership is putting the pedal to the metal and front office is doing what they want to do. But I don't know if you can argue that that's had any tangible impact on the roster. I don't know if it always works. With AD, he obviously, personality-wise, he's the kind of guy that he kind of, like when DeMarcus was in the fold, then you heard him get more vocal about how important it was, how you need stars, and this is why Boogie is important for us. And he was all in when DeMarcus was there. And then when DeMarcus was gone, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like I read that he made a comment not too long ago that he was calling Jrue Holiday like the best two-way player in the league. Where I think he uplifts the guys who he plays with at the time.
Yeah.
I think that's his MO. That's the way he's wired. And, we'll see what happens for him down the road.
I do think Davis took a step forward on the floor this past season. I thought, especially right after Cousins got hurt, he was more aggressive offensively. Really took everything a little bit more seriously, and I think he took a step forward. So I think that's a positive.
You're right.
I know we're going to move on. One of my favorite things about AD and just covering him is hearing other stars talk about him and what John just hit on, what he has evolved into on the floor. I always listen closely when guys talk about AD because you hear their tone of voice change and you hear their perspective. Like he is a short list guy, and I'm talking,
he's a freak show.
Top 3, 4. He's a freak show that makes, like, whether it's Kevin Durant or LeBron, like it's other guys who are all time greats. When they talk about him, they just shake their head and go, my God, like what this guy can do.
It's funny you mentioned that. I remember in London in 2012 Olympics, the buzz was already growing. He had slipped onto that roster when Blake Griffin got hurt. Some other guys weren't able to make it. And so every time he did something in practice or every time he got a chance to play in games during the Olympics, the veteran guys were freaking out. And I say this all the time, the players know better than anybody who's legit and who's next. Like, who are the dudes that are – you saw the way they treated Donovan Mitchell last year before, I think, the attention of the entire basketball public got on. He was getting love from players at the end of games where they were going up to him like, yo, like, this dude's on another level. And AD, as you mentioned, Sam, I think that's a great point, garners that kind of attention and has since he came into the league from his peers, which is, I think, extremely important when you're talking about the pecking order of stars in this league. Speaking of which, John Schumann.
Here we go.
You're officially banned from Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles. You better watch your back in L.A. You got the Lakers at 8.
Right in the middle. See, I can't figure out, so I just stuck them right in the middle of the conference. 8 out of 15 is, 17.
I mean, he's got to make it in the playoffs. He was talking about
barely.
I mean, he was talking about not making the playoffs earlier.
This is LeBron James we're talking about, you.
Where would you have him? 3rd? Where would you put him?
I think they would be. I could see them getting as high as 5 easily, potentially 4.
As high as 5 doesn't mean like, hey, they're the 5th best team in this continent.
No, I'm saying, look, last year, who was the third seed in the West?
Portland.
Do you think a LeBron James-led Lakers team with what they have right now is better than that Portland team from last year? I do.
I don't know. Like I said, I've said it 100 times already on this. I have no idea how to judge this team.
I know, but I'm saying this is LeBron we're talking about. He's played on any number of teams that you look at and go, no way, no way. And then the season starts.
But
and I know it's been in the East.
Right.
I know.
Exactly. That's point number one.
Yes, but it's still LeBron.
Right. But he still had Kevin Love and or Kyrie Irving the last 4 years. And he had Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh the 4 years before that. You know, those four guys I just named are all better than anybody on the Lakers right now.
Right. But I'm saying what you're saying is you have the utmost faith in LeBron and yet no faith whatsoever in his supporting cast, right?
And there's the defense issue. He was not a very good defensive player last year. Now, this was a decent defensive team last year. The Lakers. Is LeBron going to be a better defender with a different supporting cast around him? Maybe guys who can handle the ball a little bit more, take that sort of pressure off of him. And I mean, I wrote about that at the end of the season. I thought, the loss of Kyrie Irving really hurt Cleveland last year on the defensive end of the floor because LeBron had this extra burden on offense and just had no energy, it seemed like, during the regular season at least, to play defense. And so I have questions on both ends of the floor with this team. How is it going to work? Who's going to fit around him on offense? And then, how much is he going to be a liability again on defense, or is he going to step up on that end of the floor?
Sam, is it a misfit paradise? You agree it's a misfit paradise in terms of his supporting cast?
Yeah, it is. No, 100%. I don't know if you can argue that part. I mean, it's Misfit Island for sure. I mean, it read like an NBA version of The Onion when all these free agency transactions were coming through. It's like JaVale, Lance, Bees.
But the thing is, it's one about personalities, but it's also about, if they added Nick Young, let's say, instead of Lance Stevenson, it would all be, that the personality quirks are there, but at least Nick Young can shoot.
Still available, by the way. They should pull that trigger.
But at least Nick Young can shoot. That's a compliment. That's how you compliment LeBron, is with shooting, and they didn't do that.
I'm going to write that column, Shu. I'm going to write the Lakers need to pick up Nick Young. But I do wonder, Shu, because you've got such a great discerning eye, and you wrote about this in your breakdown a little bit. But what is your 2 cents, real quick, on the alleged strategy from the Lakers standpoint, and that idea that those Cavs teams were obviously built on shooting and high-octane offense, but the defense lacked and the playmakers were lacking, and so they try to flip that script. Are you buying that at all, or do you think it's not going to work?
I'll believe it when I see it. I really will. I have no idea how this team is going to play and how good they're going to be.
I'm of a different mind completely. I think the biggest folly teams have made in trying to deal with the Warriors is to try and beat them at their own game. I think it's a fool's venture to try and beat the Warriors. Like, we're going to outscore the Warriors. We're going to outshoot the Warriors when we get in the playoffs. My thing is, if the Lakers, even for just one season, this is a Bunsen burner season. It's a total chemistry experiment. Why not go full blown crazy mode and put together this wacky roster and try and beat them up and beat them by physically challenging the Warriors on the other end of the floor. And I'm saying, I know Lance Stevenson's certifiable. I know JaVale has his many quirks. Rondo is an extremely unique personality, to say the least. But I love the young guys, Kuzma, Ingram, that mesh of vets, young guys, and the potential they would have with Luke Walton, to me, understanding exactly how that Warriors team works. If this thing worked and they were to get into the playoffs, I would be interested to see what kind of problems. I know the Warriors would present a ton for them. I'm just curious to see what kind of problems a roster with that kind of makeup could present to the Warriors, Sam, if they were to lock up in a best of 7.
Yeah. To your point, I don't have any problem with teams trying to attack the Warriors with something new and something fresh. Because honestly, it's a misnomer that, for one, you talk about outshooting your opponent. The Rockets started this 3-point experiment before the Warriors did. They were the ones with the Rio Grande Valley Vipers, going nothing but threes and layups in the D League, and treating their minor league team like it was the chemistry lab. And they took that to the extreme, and then they started adding defensive minded pieces like, Ariza and Mbah a Moute and whatnot. And so that idea that's a copycat approach is just not accurate. And so I don't mind the Lakers trying something different. I also, from just a professional standpoint, I'm digging the potential vibe of their team when you talk about the old heads and the young guys with a lot of talent, and the energy in practice, the way they're going to try to get after it. When you got so many teams sleepwalking through the regular season, the Lakers are not going to be one of those teams. They are going to be trying to fix this thing, and all the while they will try to be getting LeBron as much rest as they can. So, I think the energy could be really good. We're going to have some flare-ups. We're going to have some stuff to write about at different points of the season because of those personalities. But it is still, to take it to this extreme and to be in today's NBA with, this few shooters that's the bottom line for me. Is I don't know how you, from the math side of things, just a numbers game, I don't know how you get to the level you want to get to when you're not, you're trading twos for threes like they're going to be.
Yeah. My thing is, if it was a long-term play, then I'd be more skeptical.
Sure.
But the first season, and when you're going to have some flexibility next summer to go out and chase another star, I'm with a 1-year experiment. And if it goes wrong, you can blow it up next summer and be like, hey, we tried that. It didn't work. All right, now let's try this. Granted, it has to make sense for LeBron physically. Like, you can't burn LeBron out this year physically. And he can't do the 82 games and 40-plus minutes a night like he did in Cleveland last year with this Lakers.
He can if he's not worried about getting to the second round of the playoffs.
You have to be committed, though, to changing everything. Like, if you're going to change the way you build around him, you have to change the way you ride that horse. That means I'm not grinding LeBron into the dirt like the Cavaliers did last year. Can't do it.
Do you guys have specific moves with them that kind of, not get under your skin, but that you looked at sideways? Because for me, the only ones that come to mind is, you can make an argument that, they re-up Kentavious Caldwell-Pope for $12 million. And that's money that I don't know if Randall would have taken it because he got 2 years out of the Pelicans. But to see Julius Randle walk out the door, to see Brook Lopez walk out the door, those are really good players. And Brook especially can obviously shoot. And the KCP component, I kind of just think it is what it is. We all know that he's repped by the same agent that reps LeBron and Rich Paul of Clip Sports. And so, that's not real hard to kind of figure that out. But that's my only thing. If you look at specific moves, anything else come to mind for you guys that you think they should have done that they just didn't?
No, I think it's more things that they shouldn't have done that they did. Rondo for $9 million. That's a point guard who can't shoot. LeBron is your de facto point guard when he's on the floor.
Right.
Lance Stevenson and Beasley for anything more than the minimum. That's 2 more that I don't get. I think you're spending, you're using your exceptions on those kind of guys that you should own, especially given that they're the way that they don't fit around LeBron. You should only be spending the minimum on those kinds of players, I would think. And so I think there was probably opportunities. If you take away those 3 moves, I think there's probably opportunities to get guys that fit better or guys with more potential.
Theoretically fit better. I understand it only, and I'm only on board because I don't know for sure yet what Kuzma, Ingram, Ball, I don't know what they are for sure yet.
That's the part. I can't wait to see those guys develop around LeBron. Yeah.
If I had a better idea of what they were, then I would have maybe taken some different risks if I was the Lakers. But wanting to preserve the opportunity to see these guys to whatever that next level of development is would have colored my opinion of how we move forward as well. I think it's the right thing to do, even if it looks crazy wrong. Right now, I think they're doing right by those young guys just to see, does Kuzma take it up to another level? Is he a potential all-star, or is he just potentially a really good role player? We don't know. I don't know what the world to make of Lonzo Ball. I was going
to say, how crazy is it that he's about the 9th name that you mentioned?
It's hilarious.
As we went through Yeah.
It's hilarious because, I mean, I was kind of surprised at how much the Lakers valued Brandon Ingram because while I've seen flashes, I haven't seen stuff from Brandon Ingram that made me think, man, this guy's untouchable. Can't mess with his development right now. He's got to maintain his position as, one of your pillars. I would have been, if it meant getting Kawhi Leonard or having an opportunity to get Paul George, which didn't matter because Sam, as you know, in Vegas, he talked about the fact that he didn't even take meetings and why he didn't allow, had moving one of those young guys meant getting my hands on a player of that caliber, then maybe I would have thought differently about how you build. But given the circumstance, I kind of like the unorthodox method that the Lakers are employing right now. And I'll be the first one to call it a disaster if they get, 30 games into the season and cannot make it work. But I like it in terms of just going against the grain in a copycat league, where everybody from New York to Phoenix thinks they're going to challenge the Warriors by piling up shooters.
I will say this, though, that, like, you talk about 30 games in, like, as much as – I mean, I'll be fascinated to watch this team from day one. Like, this is – like, I'm jealous of Sam living on the West Coast to be able to watch these guys at 7 o'clock, 7:30 every night.
Right.
But I do think this is a team that will be better at the end of the season than at the beginning just because of how much of an adjustment it is to play with LeBron. We saw guys like Rodney Hood, Jay Crowder have a hard time adjusting to it last year. And so there are going to be guys on this team that have a hard time adjusting to it, but maybe, especially the young guys, they can figure it out by January, February, March, and they could be a much better team in the second half of the season than they were in the first half.
Yeah,
I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but I like the point you made, Sekou, about the young guys, and I see what you're saying conceptually. I would also say it's probably safe to assume that if you were talking to the agents of a lot of these Lakers young guys and they were being honest, they would probably say, like, listen, this developmental track just got messier for their guys. Like, they may not be right. We shall see.
Yeah.
But I could see that viewpoint. Like, specifically Lonzo, from a media standpoint, the day that the Lakers picked up Rondo was one of my favorite of the summer from the standpoint of, that move gets reported, and I don't ever remember a situation like this, and it kind of cracked me up where, Rondo's getting picked up, and so Rondo's camp is telling the media that the Lakers told Rondo in terms of the possibility of starting that it was best man for the job, and so that starts getting reported. Well, then, naturally, we kind of go to the other side, and we're checking in with Lonzo's people. And you had this, like, yes, it was anonymous, but we all know where it's coming from. Then you had Lonzo's people firing back saying, we've never been afraid of competition. It's like, man, we're 3 months out from training camp. And Lonzo Ball, who was the belle of the ball, no pun intended, not too long ago, and the guy that Magic was so excited to land. And now he's having, like, off-season media beefs with the old head point guard who's coming in. I mean, it's just insane how much things have changed and how quickly.
Yeah, the Lakers are a show, good or bad, but now they've truly become the epicenter. California, by the way, Sam, you're in a great spot. It's the epicenter of the basketball universe.
I tell you what, the taxpayer in me doesn't feel this way, but I wish they would have. I wish they would have gotten that high-speed train built by this point. I'm gonna be living on Southwest.
Oh man, it's gonna be a wild season, no question. I can't believe it took us that long to get to the Lakers, but, I'm going to blame John Schumann for that. So all you Laker fans out there in the Twitterverse, NBA Twitterverse, go ahead and go at Shu now about his Lakers at 8th. They're going to be – they think – the Laker fans think that their team's challenging the Warriors this year too, which makes it even more hilarious and awesome how dramatic this season's going to be. Like, every matchup that LeBron has with the Rockets, Warriors – during the regular season, people are going to read into that what it means in the postseason. If I've learned anything covering this league for as long as I have, those things tend to not matter at all. How how the Lakers play on a given night in November or December, with this team and what they look like potentially once they get to the playoffs and what they've developed into by then are going to be two totally different things that you can't draw a line between. So,
well, and to that point for the fans, the schedule itself is a reminder that don't get it twisted. This is a business, right?
Yeah.
So Warriors, Lakers getting prime real estate on that schedule. It's a business decision. They unofficially knocked the Rockets out of that spot. Same thing with the Knicks, you know. I mean, but basketball wise, like the most, I don't know, genuine's a word. Like, the matchup that we should be seeing is Warriors Rockets. But the thing that has people's attention is going to be interesting is Warriors Lakers.
No question. We're down to our 9th and 10th spots, Shu, on these Western Conference summer rankings. Spurs, Blazers. Very strange to see the third seed from last year this low, in Portland being 10th. The Spurs is understandable given what they've dealt with, given what Pop has had to deal with, since the season ended. No Kawhi, obviously, adding DeMar DeRozan, trying to figure out what to do in the post-Tony Parker era, all the pressure on DeJounte Murray. Do either one of these teams strike you as one that could maybe have a season that shocks us and does maybe better than we think?
Sure. I think with both teams, I think there's a similar theme. It's my question is how much does the departure of certain role players hurt? With San Antonio, Danny Green and Kyle Anderson, I think those departures really hurt their defense because it's just, length on the wing and two really good defenders with experience. But, the Spurs have been a top 10 defensive team for 19 of the last 21 years. So maybe they, if Pop works his magic, they can stay in the top 10 on that end of the floor. I don't think DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge fit together very well. Mm-hmm. And then with San Antonio or with Portland, I think it's another issue of losing some of their quality depth. Ed Davis was huge for them off the bench. So was Shabazz Napier and even Pat Connaughton to a small amount. Those are three important guys for them off the bench, and they brought back. They've kept their starting unit together, but it's just a matter of what did they lose with those role players, and did they, even if they didn't lose those guys, did they take a step backwards just because the West just got a little bit stronger?
Yeah, Sam, we're gonna hit the lightning round now with these last few teams. And I know like I said, I know this is a long one. Hope people are driving this, finishing off their summer. They got plenty to listen to us, plenty of time to listen to us yap on about this, which we live this every day. It's funny. I was explaining to somebody, I'm going to call her out since she doesn't listen to the podcast. I was explaining to my wife the other day why she couldn't understand why all these things were so important. She's like, what's the big deal with some guy changing the team this late, like this day of summer? I was like, if you, in the 20 years you've known me and you've never paid attention to the NBA, I was like, this is how the league evolves every summer. It changes, and the DNA changes every summer. The Grizzlies are a team, to me, I'm stunned at the way they've evolved over the past few years. They tried, Sam, to bridge the gap from the grit and grind era to whatever came next, and they failed horribly at maintaining that position. Do you see an uptick for them based on what they've done?
I mean, I hate to say it for Grizzlies fans. I don't, as far as an uptick from their past, and we can't forget that they've got a relatively accomplished past.
Yeah.
Perennial playoff contenders, and Mike Conley coming back, and he's going to be healthy in time for camp or right around there, and that's a big deal. This is a guy that we all know the story there, that he's never been an all-star, but he's an all-star level player, and that's going to help. And to me, the story of the Grizzlies that has made things so tough on them is economics come into play, market comes into play. We kind of hinted at the business component earlier. They have made a decision, for better or worse, to not break up the core they have. I think partly out of fear for just needing a big ticket item to keep people in the building. And that, I think, has played a role in Marc Gasol still being there. And, they valued the core that they had while also surely knowing that core was not the kind of core that was going to get you to a title contender status, So I'm happy for JB Bickerstaff. He's worked hard a long time to get some security there and be able to try to mold this group. But I don't necessarily see an uptick rather. No.
Shu, I'm curious, your opinion, same thing basically with the Clippers team that did decide to dismantle their core. Like they said, you know what? We're done with the Lob City's thing of the past. I don't know what to make of the Clippers now. I know they're going to be a player in free agency, in the summer of 19, but I'm not sure what they look disjointed to me just on paper. I don't know what to make of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think offensively they're really dependent on Lou Williams to just carry them, and I think that's a tough situation to be in. Defensively, I don't think they're going to be terrific. They weren't great with DeAndre Jordan. They're not going to be great without him. Most important thing, though, of course, is that Milos Teodosic is back for another year. And I think that's all we need to say, really. I mean,
neckbeard, baby, you got it. Neckbeard in the house,
dropping dimes all year long. Hopefully, staying healthy, and that'll be the highlight of the Clippers season. Then we see what they can do. Obviously, for me this year, for them, it's a question of do they get to a point where now they prioritize pulling the two guards. The two young guards that they drafted, and then putting and prioritizing their playing time over that of all their veteran guards that they have: Teodosic, Avery Bradley, Lou Williams, Patrick Beverley. There's 4 guards in front of those 2 guys, and at what point in the season do they say, "All right, it's time to play the kids"?
Yeah.
See, that part saddens me a little bit. I'll be honest, because I was like, Pat Beverley remains one of my favorite guys to watch compete. And right. I'm afraid that Shu might be right, and I think the minutes might not be as plentiful as he was hoping for.
Yeah, I mean, when you go for the full blown rebuild, you sacrifice some guys in the process. So right. it'll be a curious season for the Clippers. I'm gonna tell you right now, I know they're down at the bottom of the ranking, Shu. I crazy like what the Mavericks could be potentially in a few years, and I love watching the team kind of break out of whatever shell they are into whatever they're going to be. I like this. I like Luka Doncic getting to play with Dirk at least for a season, kind of a symbolic, if nothing else, a symbolic passing of the torch from one international star, he may be the greatest international star in league history, to another who could be, mentioned in that breath. DeAndre Jordan finally playing there. But Sam, is Dennis Mitchell the linchpin to what they're trying to do? If you want to make him your lead, your point guard of the future and kind of the trigger man of what you do?
Yeah, I think Dennis is key. I mean, that's the big question. Is those guys have been trying to quell that subplot that it'll be tricky for Dennis and Luka to play together. And I think on paper it's a fair question, but we know that Dennis likes to fill it up, and Luka likes to help other guys fill it up in addition to do his own thing. So I think it could work, and I'm with you as far as the Mavericks just being low-key one of the more compelling teams out there. I mean, they're like a league pass all-star, I think, potentially. The Mavs are going to be interesting if nothing else, and you certainly hope for Dirk's sake that they give him something to enjoy if this is the final go-round.
Yeah.
Luka is going to be the kind of guy that makes you flip the channel every night to see what he's doing, how he's coming along. And, and Dennis had some fireworks moments last year, and I'm not going to sleep on Rick Carlisle, still one of the best to do it in the game. And to his credit, it's just you don't typically see, accomplished championship coaches who are willing to take a pounding in a rebuild like Rick has and stick around. And so because he's come through that fire a little bit, for his sake, I hope he gets to reap the rewards. It's a little bit, not quite the extreme by any means of a Brett Brown situation, but I think stability is huge, and that's the one thing that franchises seem to forget all the time, and the Mavs and Mark Cuban hasn't forgotten that. So we'll see what Rick can do with those guys. So they're going to be interesting and the kind of team that could sneak up on you on any given night.
Yeah. The Alex Lynn era is over in Phoenix. I don't know if you'd heard about this, but it's officially ended. I remember and I was very critical of him as a selection when he got drafted. I was like, wait a minute. I was like, how are we drafting a guy this high that didn't dominate or even come close to dominating, at the previous level? So I'm not surprised that it didn't work out. Good luck to Alex Lynn. In the Lynn area, it's the Lynn Sanity, Vinsanity era in Atlanta. Hopefully he can kind of show us what he's supposed to be all about in a different uniform. But Phoenix is doing this again. DeAndre Ayton, you get a vet like Trevor Ariza, who's going to be interesting. Brand new coach, Devin Booker with a big contract. But is there any reason to be hopeful about what's taking place this season in Phoenix?
I'm curious about the coaching situation most of all. Actually, I'm just curious as to see, is a coach that we don't know. I'm curious and has had some success on the international level. So I'm curious to see how Kokoskov, is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
Changes things, both offensively and defensively. Can he get the ball moving? This is a team over the last 5 seasons that has not moved the ball very well. They've ranked last in assist percentage over the last 5 years. If you can get the ball moving a little bit better, that can make Booker a more efficient scorer and get other guys involved. And then defensively, this team ranked last on both ends of the floor last year. They got nowhere to go but up. But the question is, how do they do that? And, it's about right now starting from scratch, building a foundation for when these young guys develop. They add more young guys and see where they can be 3 or 4 years from now. But it starts now with a new coach and a couple of new players.
It's funny. The new coach was on the staff in Detroit years ago. He's got extensive NBA experience. That's the thing that's interesting to me that people kind of label him, well, he's kind of an international guy and this and the other. He's got great NBA experience. I don't know if it's going to mean anything with that roster they got and figuring it out, but he's been around for quite some time. Sam, we're going to finish up our view of the Western Conference here with a team you see and know very well, the Sacramento Kings, and I really liked Marvin Bagley as their pick in the draft. But man, you got all this young talent you've assembled over the past few years. Is there anybody that you can hang your hat on as a franchise and say, this guy's going to be our bell cow, and we're going to ride him out of this lottery, malaise we've been in forever and back into something serious? I don't know. I don't know what the mood is in Sacramento, in Northern California, up there about the Kings and whether anybody has seen enough from these guys to be convinced that one of them is potentially a change agent for the Kings.
So the cowbell franchise needs a bell cow? Is that what you're telling me?
Pretty much.
Yeah, they're interesting. I talked to a GM recently that I was giving him a hard time because I said, man, he was real bullish on the Kings. And from the standpoint of saying that he likes how they're taking as many bites out of the draft apple as possible, hoping these guys obviously hit. They're using their money. They're being somewhat discerning with their money this summer as opposed to last summer. And, and he, from a GM standpoint, felt like they had a lot on their roster that was going to inspire phone calls come trade deadline. And so it's either that or by that point, maybe you start to think that, some of these young guys are actually hitting. The local excitement, because as you guys know, I'm kind of based in between the Bay and Sacramento,
right,
is very, very Harry Giles centric. He had a really good showing at Summer League, tough story where he went through so many injuries coming into the league, missed all of last year. He was 100% healthy and playing ball, I want to say like January of last year, but they kind of did that Joel Embiid thing where they decided, let's keep him out. Let's go ahead and give him a fresh start and a clear runway in year 2. And so far, so good. And not only has he looked like a fairly dynamic player with a lot of potential, good personality. He's a good spokesman for the team and has been out there and seems to want to be in Sacramento, which matters to the locals. We'll see. They have some subplots to monitor. I'm curious going forward. Dave Yeager's been there a couple of years, and I think, when he came to town, he was trying to push for playoff contention with DeMarcus Cousins being the centerpiece, and this is a different challenge than the one that he thought he was going to be looking at. So, I kind of continue to monitor that situation. De'Aaron Fox I think Harry and De'Aaron are 1 and 1A when it comes to the guys who they're hoping can kind of pop right now. And,
right.
And then certainly with Marvin, being right there as well. So, the Bogdanovich did some good things last year. I know he was a Schumann favorite, I believe,
player on the team.
The weekly rookie rankings. Yes. So they've got interesting players. They have like the kind of roster that a GM would find very, very interesting. The problem is that the mainstream fan wouldn't necessarily agree.
Yeah, it's just, again, I don't know if it's my history with developing teams that, when you watch a team go from 13 wins to the playoffs in a span of, 4 or 5 years, you kind of get fixated on these reclamation projects. And I'm just
sure
the Kings is cyclical. At some point, they're going to get back in the mix and be a playoff team. I can't wait to figure out which group of guys that they've been through hits. Like you sit around waiting, wondering which combination of players have to be in place for it to happen. What, because it's about timing and just, being prepared when there's an opportunity, all that good stuff. And I point to the Warriors all the time, a team that, was figuring it out. Like this group they have now didn't happen by accident. I mean, they were trying to figure it out. Things fell into place. They, and then the good fortune, once it starts rolling, for some teams it rolls all the way, all the way up. Like, I'll be curious to see how far the Kings get in the process of getting back to relevance in the next 3 to 4 years, and if these are the guys that they have on the roster now who are going to be about that. And Harry Giles is, I agree. He was a revelation in Summer League. I was stunned at how fluid he looked, and he reminded me why people had him so highly rated when he was in high school. In terms of just sheer talent, you can see the raw ability that's there. So it'll be interesting to see what Yeager and what the Kings do with that and all those young guys moving forward.
Quick addendum on that, on the Giles front, guys, that I thought was good local insight. A buddy of mine, Sean Cunningham from News 10, is around the team all the time. Mm-hmm. He made the point to me about Harry. He said, what's been a trip is that year one, Harry was pretty quiet because you guys know, like, when you're injured, you don't have capital when it comes to your teammates. And so he kind of just did his own thing. By all accounts, and Sean was the one telling me this, he's like, man, this dude has gotten vocal quick. And from a leadership standpoint, he's calling guys out. Right. I think he's going to be the kind of almost a Jimmy Butler type when it comes to just, trying to be that, that sand in the oyster to try to get something going here.
Interesting. This whole league is interesting. I thought I would get tired of it. By now, like you have a long season. You know what's coming in free agency when LeBron's a free agent. I thought I'd be tapped out by now. The fact that I'm still, like, every morning curious to see what happens. Where's Melo? What's happening next with this guy, that guy? I've kind of surprised myself that I've been able to maintain the energy to stay locked in on this. It's been fun. This has been a fun season from the start of camp through the playoffs and the finals, free agency, and now. We're just now taking our break on the Hang Time Podcast. We are taking a little break for the rest of August. Be back the first week of September to get things cranked up for the 2018-2019 season. I'd be remiss if I didn't, let everybody know that not only is Sam Amick of USA Today Sports a fantastic guest, one of our closest friends, around the league and one of the best dudes ever, he and his partner have a great podcast that you need to check out as well, the A to Z podcast that he does with Jeff Z. He works with him at USA Today. Tell Jeff I said what's up, even though he's a Spartan. I forgive him. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Hang Time on Apple Podcasts. And don't forget to leave a review. We will see you in a few weeks right here on the Hang Time Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Hang Time Podcast, and be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts for a new episode every Thursday this season. And as always, say Kuna Matata.